Marcella Abadi Rhodes with Abadi Accessibility, and I wanted to talk to you today about minimums and maximums when you're designing. So they're in the standards, in the ADA standards for accessible design. There are sometimes you're going to find some ranges, like you should mount something between this range and that range, or you're sometimes going to see things that are minimums or maximums. So you shouldn't mount something at a this is the maximum it should be mounted at, or this is the minimum it should be mounted at, for example, or installed. The location should be a maximum of this length or minimum of this length. So us designers, we tend to be a little bit more literal. So like we see a number and we think that's the dimension that we should design for. So if I see that a counter is got a 34-inch maximum limit, so I go, okay, my drawing should say 34 inches above the finished floor. And sometimes I'll add the maximum so that the contractor doesn't go over that. The problem is that if we do that, there is a tendency for same thing like we do, look at the maximums and we probably ignore the word maximum. We just look at the number. The contractor is going to do the same. The contractor is going to look at that number that you gave him, which is 34, and he's going to fabricate his and mount his cabinets or the sinks, counters, whatever, at that height. So there's no tolerances built in. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you a little bit of a presentation that I created to give you some suggestions on what not to do. So in order to avoid a violation in the field, you want to avoid dimensioning to the maximums or minimums. I'll give you a few examples. So door maneuvering clearance is a very good example, which happens a lot where you see the 18 inches and most people just say 18 inches, but they forget that it's a minimum. It should really be more than 18. 18 is the lowest limit to the maneuvering clearance of a door. Same thing with the 60 inches. 60 inches is just the minimum limit. It could be bigger. It should be bigger. So what happens if I just put 18 inches? Most of the time, the contractor is going to see that, and then sometimes they don't get it right. Sometimes this one, for example, is 17 inches from the corner to the door. The door is not installed, but we can assume that the 18 is way into the door frame. So the door is probably not going to be off by a half an inch. And they'll argue with me. They'll say, as the inspector, they'll say, well, it's just a half an inch off. Well, not really. It's the 18 is the minimum it needs to be. It should be bigger. So that's one example. Other things that people misunderstand or maybe get wrong is the 4 inches off of the wall on an object that's mounted on a wall that's on a circulation path. So 4 inches is the maximum it can be, but of course, sometimes, most of the time, things are not mounted at the maximums. They go beyond. So this one is 4 3/4 of an inch. So it's 3/4 of an inch off of the maximum. So really needed to have been less, 4 inches or less. And so that's where this is, even though it's just 3/4 of an inch off, it's wrong. And same thing with sidewall grab bars. Sidewall grab bars have a 54-inch minimum, but and I want to focus a little bit on the two bottom dimensions. 12 inches is a maximum. If you are using a 42-inch minimum, then it really does need to be exactly 12 inches. It's a maximum only if you have a longer grab bar because the minimum is a 54. So if somebody misunderstands that maximums of the 12 inches and they don't see the 54-inch minimum required, they're going to think, okay, well, since it's a maximum 12 inches, it can be closer to the wall. And they do that without really understanding that it's altogether needs to be 54 minimum. So that means that if you have a 42-inch grab bar, it has to be exactly 12 inches for you to yield the 54. So that this is what happened here is that it was a 42-inch grab bar, but they installed it closer than 12 inches from the rear wall, which yielded a 53 1/4 inches instead of 54 minimum. Sinks are, like we had talked about in my, before I started this presentation, 34 inches maximum above the finished floor. But most of the time, if there's no, if you dimension it 34 inches, there's no tolerances built in for construction mistakes. So that means at this point, it's 34 1/2 inches above the finished floor. So it's much higher, not much higher, but it's half an inch higher than the maximum allowed. It could have been lower. So my recommendation would be don't dimension it to 34, dimension it to 33. And then you have a built-in cushion. The reach ranges are also a range between 15 and 48, 48 being the maximum to an operable part. So light switches are notoriously installed incorrectly, partially because I think electrical and electricians are taught to mount to 48 to the middle of the junction box, to the box, instead of to the operable part. So that means that if they mount it 48 inches to the box, then if they have a rocker switch, 48 inches is not even to the operable part. The operable part is at the top of the switch, which is 49 1/4 in this case. And the other one is 48 1/2 to the top of the toggle switch. So both of those are too high. So there are some tolerances built in, but the ADA says that construction and manufacturing tolerances dimensions are subject to conventional industry tolerances, except where the requirement is stated as a range with specific minimums and maximums endpoints. So all the ones that I showed you previously, where it tells you this is the maximum and there's a minimums, those are not covered by construction tolerances that are industry standard. So I hope that helps you understand not to dimension to the maximums and minimums in your drawings, because there's going to be mistakes in the field and you want to avoid those. Have a great day.